So today we're having a quick conversation regarding School Finance 101. And this is a follow-up to two community presentations that myself, Dr. Midzik, and Peter Erkin hosted in the district and wanted to ensure that everyone had an opportunity to access this. If you decided to do that virtually, this is the same presentation that was given live, but it'll be a little bit condensed. But it's important that we share this information, we continue the dialogue, and that we have opportunities to gather feedback. So, the agenda, what I would want to get if I were a community member attending this virtual meeting. So, what is the goal of budget development for Greendale schools? How do we build the budget? How does the state funding formula impact us? How do we prioritize and align the budget? What are the projected budget and tax levy for next year? And what are the next steps for the budget process? So the goals of the budget is a reflection of how we're allocating resources, our time and money towards priority areas. And it's important that we're making a difference for kids and how that money is aligned. And so we have some visuals of the work in action. So we really want to see that from our budgeting process when we're making those choices and how we're going to utilize time and how we're investing our dollars, that each student within the district has an opportunity to achieve at his or her best. And so they all students have the maximum opportunity within their own um, pathway in their education. So you see some emphasis here within fine arts. We very strategically have focused resources on our fine arts program. We see that from our elementary level all the way up through high school, but we also are thinking about all programming within the district, ensuring that students have those opportunities. So we utilize a set of budgetary principles. And so within the slideshow that will also be linked, you can take a further look into those. But that is 10 principles that give us feedback on how we prioritize limited revenues. So, for example, number one is very strategically that we are going to be positive, proactive, and put students first and how we um, work through the budgetary process. And so I'm going to highlight several of those budgetary principles throughout the conversation here today. And then at a 10,000-foot view, how we build the budget, identifying needs first. What are the emerging needs of our students? Then working through the revenue projection. What is the state funding and limits on that state funding that we will have for the future year? How are we then prioritizing within limited resources to priority areas? And then finally, refining the budget. And that's where we get everything into balance. So we've taken those emerging needs, we've prioritized those that are most essential, and we've figured out a way to get the budget in balance. And so that takes outside the box thinking. And so we have a budgetary principle that allows us to use possibilities thinking and how we solve budgetary challenges. And it's really understanding what are those core needs that we need to fund in the upcoming year and being open minded in terms of how we find the resources in order to pay for those. And all of that work is going to be centered around our district mission and vision. So, as we talk about identifying needs, here's a listing of the budget calendar. So, working from left to right, we're starting in the month of November, beginning to have those conversations around needs identification. By the time we get to January in the budget development process, we are doing projecting revenues and doing budget projections for the following year. Then, as we get into the springtime, we are in prioritization of budget. From May to June, we are then presenting preliminary budget to the board, and October 15th, finalizing the budget, getting the final information from the state to be able to finalize and set a tax levy for the school district. So as we build the budget, we're looking at staffing and class size, the complexity of student needs, as well as enrollment trends within our school district. So another one of our budgetary priorities is around class size targets. And so this is a document that the board reviews annually and provides feedback. When the district looks at opening up open enrollment seats for the following year, the district will look to open up seats if we are below minimum class size targets. So for example, if we were at 19 students per first grade seat, the first grade class size targets are between 20 and 24. So if I was at 19 seats, we would propose to the board for consideration adding seats to get to the low end of that class size target. So it allows us to utilize capacity that we have to gain additional revenue if there's capacity available within our schools. Then we also look at our current enrollment by grade level. So as we move from our lower elementary levels up to grades 4 and 5, we start to get a larger resident enrollment base and students that may have participated in outside programs in private school or outside the district are beginning to come in. Our class size targets increase at that fourth grade level. We see our total enrollment growing. Then as we get into the middle school level, again, there are some students that we capture, and so we see our enrollment trends moving from the 180s up into the 200s. And then we look at our high school capacity. There we have capacity for over 900 students total, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. So there's where we have our highest population. And we review current enrollment within the district, and then we use multiple forecasting models to look at the trends of student increase and decrease over time to do a best projection of what we believe that student enrollment to be in the following year. And then we use that for planning. Another key piece in doing that planning is understanding the breakdown of where students go to school from that total population within the community. So we know that of students that are at school age, so 4K to 12th grade, of those in the Greendale community, 90% of those students attend Greendale schools. And then of the remaining 10%, about half, 5% attend private school. 3% are in other public schools through the open enrollment program, and then 1% are in voucher and 1% homeschooled. And so this is a reflection on those academic choices that our families are making. We're very proud of the fact that 90% of the students are coming here in the Greendale schools. And for those that choose other options, we do that follow up to understand what we can continue to do to improve our programming or answer questions families may have about the programming that we do have available to make sure that we're capturing as many students as possible that would want to participate and be a fit here within the school district. Next in that budget building process is taking a look at how we compare to state averages in our student demographics, as well as looking through the lens of complexity of programming. So, from left to right, our students that are economically disadvantaged, so we are just over a quarter, 25.5%, which is lower than the state average. The students that identify as the students of color, we are at 29.3%, and the state average is 32.1%. So, a reflection of the diversity of our school community. Then, percent of students that require English language support, we are at 5.9, which is just about at the state average. And then students that have an individual education plan, we are at 12.6%, and the state average is at 14.5%. And so this is a reflection of the comparisons. And as a school district team, then we have to work to do some planning around how we can best meet the needs of all students as we look at trends and where we will need to put additional resources. Then for needs identification, so the district reviews the current inflationary figure, which as of March of 22 was at a 40-year high of 8.5%. And so as we look at that 8.5% figure, we understand that there are components that will impact us as we look at salary and benefits, utilities, transportation, and our risk insurances. Those are all areas that are going to be impacted through inflation. Specifically, when we look at salary, we project right now a 4% increase. That's an assumption for our planning for 22-23. That would be $960,000 budgetarily. We compare that against the figure used for negotiated bargaining. So our teachers union is represented and falls within the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission figure of 4.7% for base wage bargaining. So when we compare that, the assumption that we have now is slightly below that figure. So 4.7% being the inflationary figure for base wage bargaining. And that's also at a high due to inflationary numbers has been increasing in recent months. Benefits, we plan for a 5% increase, understanding medical trend for the school district. So that matches 5 and 10 year averages for increased health insurance costs. And a 5% increase would be 363,000. For utilities, a 10% increase is 54,000. The price of natural gas and oil have been at multi-year highs in recent months, and so we anticipate and plan to have increased utility costs next year. Transportation, we have discussed our current contract with our provider, and due to the need for bus drivers and the limited um, labor market there, that has impacted our contracted provider, and they have increased salaries in response to retain a sufficient number of drivers, as well as gas for those buses, as well as the cost of buses as the fleet is being replaced has gone up substantially. Then risk insurances are planned to go up 5%, and that would be $12,250. So these are costs being built into the system as we do that needs identification. We work through both internal steps and external budget review steps as we engage the community, and we'll talk further about those. Then, as we move to projection of revenues, in the second step of our process, so we work through the revenue limit. So those spending limits were established in the 1993-94 school year, and that set a per pupil limit for each Wisconsin school district, as well as for charter schools, choice, and open enrollment. And so in 2012-13, in addition to these revenue limits per student, there was also a parallel model that was created for increases that was a per pupil aid allocation. And that was funded and has been funded entirely through state aid funding. So that we'll talk about the differences there in a second. The revenue limit formula takes the number of students times the per student funding level limit, and that gives you the district revenue limit. And then that is funded in two ways. So a second ago, we talked about per pupil aid being only state aid. When we talk about the revenue limit, which is the majority of revenues that we receive, is a combination of both state equalization aid and property taxes. And that state portion is determined by local property values, students, and level of spending in our community. So another way to look at that is that that revenue limit authority less the state equalization aid is what is available as maximum tax levy authority under the revenue limit. 86% of our general operational funds revenues is based on the revenue limit. And then the state equalization aid portion of that is based on our costs, our student enrollment, and that property valuation we spoke of. So the revenue limit is based on past spending, the state increase or decrease per student, and a 3-year student enrollment average. And this is a key point. So, under the revenue limit, districts with a high property value per student make up a larger percentage of their revenue limit through property taxes and a smaller amount through state aid revenues. And districts with a low property value per student are funded with a lower overall property tax and higher state revenues under the revenue limit. So this really gets to the community's ability to pay through local property taxes being evaluated based on how much property value there is per student. That's the main way in the current state funding formula for K 12 schools that the state is ranking one community versus the other in their ability to pay. And where that has a positive impact for the Greendale community is this is the 3-year average. So each of these years, you're seeing a related number, and that is the 3-year average at that point in time. And what we have seen within the Greendale community is that there has been a turnover of homes in the community and a number of younger families that have moved in, and it has resulted in an increase in student population over the last 10 years. And so you see this sharp increase overall in membership average from 2,226 students to 2,506 students. And so, from a revenue limit standpoint, there are more students, and the number of students per property value should be improving in the state formula. Because if you have a lower property value per student, then the community receives more in state aid. So we should see that play out on our next slide as we look at this. So in the blue, we have a comparison here of revenue limit and total taxing authority. So the blue represents the total equalization aid, and orange is the total tax levy. And so you will see here that same increase going upward of equalization aid as the district has been increasing in the number of students with a stable property valuation within the community. We're landlocked, so we don't have large new developments that are happening in the community. But at the same time, we have kept that tax levy flat to declining over the last 10 years. Historically, schools were funded under an indexing method that took a per student amount and then indexed it against inflation each year. So statewide average for student revenue was around $10,000 in that 2008, 2009 time period. And so schools were receiving 2 to 3% of increase to their per student allotment on an annual basis. And then that indexing model would increase based on inflation. So had that prior indexing model been used, the total increase between 2008-09 and 2022 would have been over $4,000. Actual student adjustments, what has been put in as spendable student revenue, is listed in that middle column, and that has varied over the years, typically between $0 and 270. But there was one year in 2011-12 where there was a large state budget adjustment, and so there was a $554 decline in per student allocation. So when that is netted in, the increase over this period of time is about $1,416. And so this represents what's been available as new per student revenue over that period of time from 2008 into the 22-23 school year that's upcoming. And then to look at that in the last 10 years and compare that with overall revenue per student, just over $1,000 in the last 10 years. So 1,196. The current 2-year state budget 21-22, our current school year, and next year there is no per student spendable revenue limit increase. Then to add to that a visual from 2 slides ago. So the red representing that inflationary adjusted per student revenue allocation, and then the changes after the 2008 school year in the blue, we see the changes in what is per student new revenue allocation. And so it has become much more difficult for the school district to do long range planning because there is not a consistent allocation from year to year. And here you'll see the blue line trending up and down, and through that, the district has to figure out how to plan and provide for sustainable programming. So another one of the budgetary principles is we are going to invest in programming that can be sustained over the long term. And so the district has to consider the ups and downs of this per student funding each year in figuring out how we're going to sustain those programs. Another area of focus is around students with an IEP and providing those special education services. So the total expenditures and revenues we need to run that programming, provide for those services, is projected at just over $6 million for the 22-23 school year. We know of that amount that two-thirds of that will come from local dollars, and a third will be direct through state aid and federal aid. The local transfer is just under $4 million, 3,965,000. And due to the increasing complexity and investment the district makes each year into that programming, that number is a 76% increase since the 2012-13 school year. And so, with limited per student revenues and more complex and increasing challenge in funding special education services that are by law required per the written IEPs, it it creates additional challenges in how we balance our budget each and every school year. The district has signed on to a letter from a group, Act Now to Invest. There's a coalition of businesses throughout the state and schools and nonprofits that have advocated for investing $343 in new spendable revenue per student for the 22-23 school year and increasing the state level special education reimbursement to 50% and reallocating an portion of the estimated $3.7 billion state surplus for the current biennium and in order to make this investment in schools and assist schools with keeping up with the complexity and investment in special education programming and inflationary costs per student making that investment. Third area, we then are working through the prioritization of our budget. And so we know we have a current budget deficit of $980,514. So to tackle this, thinking about our budgetary principles. So here are three of those principles. Again, coming back to our class size targets, thinking about universal instruction strategies, so what we would call tier one instruction, what we are providing to all students, and then equity and equality of opportunity and how those resources are distributed. So we want to think about that in the alignment of how we prioritize. We also have the question of how is the district utilizing one-time federal stimulus money and how does that play into planning for the 22-23 school year? So here we have listed the three rounds of federal ESSER stimulus dollars. The first round extends for programming through September of this year, 2022, the second round through September of 2023, and the third round through September of 2024. Here's a chart that gives further information on the allocation and the expenditures of those ESSER funds. So that first round, which really goes into September of this year, allocation was 232,000 and those dollars have been allocated and spent in alignment with the grant. ESSER 2 was $1,082,626 and about 60% of those funds have been committed. Those funds are intended to assist with the response to the coronavirus and mitigation measures we're taking within the schools, and then recovery academically for our students. So again, about 60% of that has been invested. ESSER 3, $2,431,000 allocated. Those funds go into 2024 before they're fully need to be expended. Here we'll see a really low number, $39,000 that's been spent, but the budget of how these dollars are going to be utilized has been created. The district was recently able to submit that full budget to the Department of Public Instruction to align, and we will have costs that we've accrued that will further increase that spending. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So these one-time ESSER funds, we plan to utilize 1.5 million of those revenues next year towards one instructional support specialist. So these are individuals that are working directly with students and doing coaching for our teaching staff in completing recovery work for our students academically uh, after the pandemic. And so these are positions that were created in the 21-22 year as a 2-year project that would be funded through ESSER funding. And we are committing approximately $1 million of our 2.4 million of ESSER 3 funding towards those positions. Second is Univent replacement at Highland View. So Univents at Highland View have far exceeded their expected useful life. And as a focus on indoor air quality, the district has completed a budgeting process and RFP process to get pricing for new equipment, removal and installation of the current univents to be replaced with vertical classroom univents and 20 classrooms at Highland View. And so the investment of ESSER 3 funding, another $1 million is being set aside to complete that work. And in addition to that, the district will have budgeting for nursing and health room staff and other heating, ventilation, and cooling as we continue that focus on safe indoor air quality. So, making investments that are in direct relation to COVID mitigation, as well as that instructional recovery for our students. So the last point is the district is working strategically because this is one-time funding provided from the federal government. And we are working to ensure that we are investing in that, that our students have opportunities to get the support that they need for academic recovery, and that we are also making needed investments for COVID mitigation. Then, in terms of that refinement process, some of the steps that we are taking internally as we work through the school year. So, during February of 2022, working with our administrative leadership team on our budget prioritization. In March of 22, working through the development of the staffing model that takes into account the work that we have done to this point. And then in April, working through long range planning documents and ensuring that we are getting priority budgeting for resources we're going to need for the 22-23 school year. And then in the middle of May in 2022, on May 16th, the district will present to the board a preliminary budget for the 22-23 school year. And then as we work through the external review steps, having the conversations, we're able to have the conversation here digitally today. And then in May, continuing our work with the citizen finance team, who will also give us input on our budget priorities for 22-23. And so these are all important steps as we work through that refinement. Um, the prioritization, moving to the refinement of the budget for next year, that we are getting different levels of input. And so as we get that information, that gets us to our last step in getting to a balanced budget. So we start with a deficit budget of $980,513. Our process is to gather ideas from administration, rank those, share our problem and early solution ideas with staff for further ideas. We then shared that problem and solution ideas with administration and staff to the community for further feedback. So as we're releasing this video in April of 22, we are also going to have a companion document we would ask you to complete if you are reviewing this prior to the board discussion on May 16th, to add in additional feedback that you have on prioritization. That's going to help us with additional ideas for reductions and revenue generation and help us to present that preliminary budget to the board on May 16th. And our goal is to offer a refinement document that allows us to get to a balanced budget for planning for next year. So some of those ideas that we've had conversations about, we have a full-time auditorium manager that supports the school district, and we currently pay for that through operational dollars. That position is created to support community access, both for rentals of the auditorium space as well as functions that are community based, when we have concerts and plays that are open to the community. And so we discussed the moving of that position from a funding standpoint to a community service fund to allow us to sustain other operational programming in the classroom. We've then worked through our staffing model and looked at staff savings due to class choice at the high school level and identified potential savings there. We've discussed reducing building budgets by 5%. We have looked at the 5% increase projected for health insurance and discussed ways in which we could reduce that health insurance renewal to 0%. And so we have ongoing conversations with our benefit consultants about ways that we may be able to do that. And that would result in $238,000 in savings. We have a group at College Park that is um, currently at three sections of kindergarten, and based on student enrollment size projections for next year, have looked at the ability of condensing back to two sections of elementary. Then for open enrollment revenues, have looked at the ability to increase that minimum class size target to 24 students per grade level in grades 4 and 5. And that would potentially result in 8 new open enrollment seats. And so the related revenues to that would be $66,000. We've looked at our OPEB transfer, so dollars that we pay for benefits that were accrued as of 2012 by staff members. And the district on an annual basis has costs for staff that had accrued benefits that are retiring from the district, and being able to adjust down based on decreasing costs next year, adjust that down $50,000. We talked earlier about the need to utilize ESSER funding for one-time expenditures. We do have a significant increase to transportation next year, and there is an extreme shortage of bus drivers. And while we work through the process of doing a full RFP for transportation within the community, the 18% increase that the district will see for next year utilizing ESSER funding to pay for that increase cost and allow the district to complete an RFP process through summer of 2022 for the 23-24 school year. And then technology, looking at the costs for technology insurance for student devices, and providing the option for families to purchase insurance in lieu of the district covering those a portion of those repair costs. Bringing in additional revenue and allowing parents to make that choice, whether they would like to pay an insurance fee for the year of $15 or pay a higher charge if there is damage to the device during the year. So these items are ideas that are being discussed that could bring the current budget deficit from $980,000 to $320,000. So still additional work that the team will have to work through. Then from a revenue standpoint, we look at our general fund revenues. We talked about the balance between state aid and local property tax revenues through the revenue limit. And so here we see that we have 62% of general fund revenues coming from those state funds and 33% through local property tax. So a larger percentage coming from the state, and then a smaller percentage through federal government, and then 2% through other entities. Then general fund expenditures, 49% through salaries and 21% through benefits. So just about 70% on staffing. And then the other two large areas that we have are purchase services. We talked about costs of utilities, heat, and electricity within our buildings. We also have our transportation costs and other contracted services within the district. And then 12% being that Fund 27 special education transfer. So those local dollars that need to be provided and moved to that fund so that we can pay for those special education services. So the next question, what are things going to look like in terms of tax levy for the 2022-23 school year? The district would project right now a 2.5% decrease to the tax levy to 15,176,850. To break that down further, we work under fund accounting. So here we see those items that are controlled by the district, the general fund operations, debt fund, community services, and facilities. So you'll see the general funds make up 50% of that total tax levy, debt funds being a third, 33%, our community services being 4%, and then $200,000 specifically to facilities would be 1%. And so total school tax levy of 14,742,791. So those are dollars being invested back into programming and related debt for our programming. Then we have two items that are outside the district control, but these end up being on your tax bill when you look at the school district tax levy. One are payments for private school vouchers. So each year the state will tell us how much has been provided, and then that flows through on a school district tax levy. And we project that to be $434,000 next year. So that would be 3% of that tax levy bill. And then the other item is the tax incremental financing district for the village of Greendale. So projecting from 2021, we were at 1.5 million. That would be about 9% of that total amount. So if we add in the TIF and voucher amounts, that would get us to 16,720,325. So we want to provide that breakdown because frequently you just see one number on your bill, and to give you an idea of the percentages that these areas make up of that tax bill. Then total tax levy, the blue bars, and total mill rate. So we see that we've had a stable to declining mill rate within the school district. The latest in 21-22 being $10.22. Right now, we are talking about a tax levy decrease of 2.5%, and we will be able to project the mill rate as we get updated property valuation within the community. One other item we wanted to add on to the presentation was fund balance. So the difference between the district's assets and liabilities at any point in time. And when we present this on our financials, this is a snapshot at the end of June 30th. So one point we want to make is that this, while it's presented in the financials as June 30th, it is very low in late November before we get state aid payments and property tax revenues for our school year. So just like you would have a checking account where you see highs and lows during the school year, while we do a snapshot on June 30th, our low point is at the end of November. It's important that we have a healthy fund balance to avoid short-term borrowing. And currently, the school district does not do borrowing on a short-term basis. We're able to pay all of our bills with cash that's in the bank. A healthy fund balance leads to better bond rating, so lower interest rates. The district has recently gone through that multiple times in the financing of the 2018 referendum and refinancing of other debt issues as interest rates have been low. So up to the beginning of March of 2022, the district had several refinancing, and the district understands that we are currently in an environment where interest rates will likely increase in the near future. And so we've tried to take advantage of rates when they were at their lowest. So the total fund balance percentage is measured as a percentage of expenditures. Board policy sets this as a minimum of 15%, and the district currently sits close to 20% of fund balance percentage. To give a visual on that cash position during the year. So here you'll see between June, July, August, and September, cash position is in a better spot. And then as we get into the school year and have our full payrolls running in the months of October and November, we get to our low point. And then as revenues are coming in December, January, February, that increases and then stabilizes into the spring. Budget savings measures, the district is always looking for opportunities and creative problem solving for our budgetary challenges. That's a part of our budgetary principles. So we look at local, state, and federal contract savings. The district has switched to a self funded health insurance plan with the goal of saving 8 to 10% of our planned expenditures on a fully funded plan in our first year. And the district is currently midway through that first year of self funding, but has already seen opportunities for savings and has had good performance in that first year. So we are looking outside the box for those opportunities where we can see those health insurance savings. The district also wants to make the most use of our resources and collaborate with the Village of Greendale. We currently share technology services through a shared IT director with the Village of Greendale. So we are very happy for that partnership and grateful for the village team that has partnered with us. So next steps for budgeting, the boards will review the preliminary budget for 22-23 on May 16th and approve that preliminary budget on June 20th. That gets us to our July 1 fiscal year start. The community will be engaged on September 19th in the annual meeting and budget hearing. So that's the opportunity to see a live presentation. It will have components that are similar to the conversation today about our budgetary process for the 22-23 school year. And then October 24th, the board would plan to meet and do the final budget approval and tax levy certification. So the outlook, to summarize our budgeting next steps, there's no new spendable revenues per student for 22-23. So the district needs to look to cost increases by offsetting them with new revenues, efficiencies, or cost savings. The district is going to be very strategic in the utilization of ESSER funding, as this is one-time funding for our academic recovery as well as mitigation of risk and COVID-19. So the district will be thoughtful in how we utilize that one-time funding to ensure that we are not planning to utilize it for recurring costs year to year. Our budgetary principles will guide that resource allocation, and we're going to strive for a sustainable mode of operation within those budget constraints and the fiscal realities. We're going to do our best to do that. And we are thinking about our students from our youngest grade levels to those that are graduating from the school district and ensuring that opportunity for all students and that we have programming in place that is going to meet the needs of all those students K to 12. And so if you have other questions regarding the presentation and want to continue this conversation, feel free to contact me at the phone number here, 423-2705, or feel free to email me as well. And I'd be happy to talk to you about the information within this presentation or additional questions that you have after watching this presentation. If you haven't already and you are interested in completing the survey, you're receiving this in late April of 22 or early May of 22, please see the survey document for input on prioritization of the budget for the 22-23 school year. Thank you for your time and hope to talk again in the near future. Thank you.